sa xi wei xi ju xi mian do zheng ri zhe ba ling xi nin de jian ba de sang jie xin do min de gui wa zhou gue nam da xin la jue ba la xiu yi de mong gu ru ran na mian da gan yan da ya mi 一起多了你了呢，爱国。
Like the Dharma, supreme assemblage by the merit of listening to the Dharma, the attitude to the Buddha, the state of all beings.
三年觉当作业做那么拉，讲究不然多大女教书，那些学习级别做那么简着那边。上节着我来学，上节觉当作业就那么拉。讲究不然多大女的中间，大节学习级。做那么简着了边界三着把它修。哦呀，他蛮就那么些他那里面甚至他们这个点的都不知道那边把杨大把左边三节没人不。今年家淘宝了家提起到特别去什么3年的公路根据个什么能力把set up的三把修，大康三把去为特别去的。 아니 지 창조 람비치면 나온세 하돈 침배 값기 아니 지 엄마 탄주베 랑주기다 다른 게 값수 아니 랑주기 딘시 고수기다 디니마 트웨기 슝디 슈엘하데와데 무티니마 슈기스
Make your mind very clear with the motivation that you're doing whatever it takes in order to achieve the highest most precious state of perfect, complete Buddhahood, in order to be of benefit to all mother sentient beings who are infinite space. So begin with that motivation, making it very strong and clear for listening to this teaching. The teaching that we're discussing today is the Great Treatise for the Stages of the Path to Enlightenment. Within this text, there's a section of the Great Insight, and then a category of that section is the distinction between the Prasangika Madhyamaka and the Svatantrika Madhyamaka. And then under that category, we're in a section about refuting the autonomous syllogism and autonomous reason. And we're going to continue on with this explanation.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that. 치고 디 최진 미당 다랑라 미다와당 배품바당 최응원보소라 미다와 여바 진비 유남니 랑게 루기장 탄예도 여바 되베 대달아 리뷰네바 마이노 스타 근데 디카도라 디테어와 다 가스나 진짜 신자기 딘지 세디 신자 세디다 치고 응어마와 랑 신주바 켈림비 루기 아니 저와 세메 주비 니든도 되게 되니 니든도 켈랭기 아니 켈랭디 다수 거네 안 담자 고바 제바 세들 신다든지 샤인데 다음 랑신 주바 켈림비 루기 아니 세마를 가리래 랑게 틴니 주비 샤자라 세마 소웨 아니 틴데 세메 니든기 다지 켈링거로 다 틴데 켈링 다디 아니 균질라 거네 아니 현장에 딘지 샤와이나 아니 딜라 가지기 좁아 갈당 왔으나 딘데 샤와이나 딘데 왜 세마디게 샤자디 심어 주바레스 로아랑 싱 주바 지미 조도다 찍바 쿠이신 샤자라 치멘니고레스 다 치멘니 와인자 딘데 치멘니게 딘이 로아 오 딘데 다 두르스드나 샤자 치멘 마주베 딘데 왜 치멘 니드게 되게 다라 딘이 신기 담자 고에 기드니 딘데 무 말에서 딘데 돈유도 비타와 걸스키기레스 어디라디 다 딜라 개발 제고레스 다 지름지로와 다 가리래 진다 건 갈라오르다 치고디스나 우에마웨르와 우에마웨 기드니 가스나 르와 켈레기르와 최진나 믹체 다 랑라 미다와 디체 빼 튠베디 품바체 최응되는 공부라 소바 미다와 요바 준비 딘디비 로 세메 쿠이 요바 뒤에 요바 준비 세마저로 세마디기 유두규에 딘디비 따주 뒤숨디 아니 가리래 네 세메 주바래 타녀도 요래 딜라지 빈둥이 말해스 그러와 거기 세마 고랑 세마디기 샤잘라 디니지 빈둥이 마도 지기 세마디기 주바 뒤에 유 따주 뒤숨디라 세메 누구 말해스 그러와 메두자니 티직베 어디 랑로 타녀도 여장 개달라지 빈누기 말해스 로와 어다 십제 디레 당선은 가스나 세메 세메 주바 되게 따줘 되숨디 시주바래 세마디기 샤자디 시마 주바래 세마 관계 이다 우마요 되게 세마 랑게 친유 주비 최진라 세마 송홍세기 딘데 세마디 랑로 시마 주바래 인도전에 시마 주안서 딘데 세마디기 샤자라 주빈뇌장 디 세마기 주바 되게 따줘 되숨디 아니 리빈누기 말해 디 타녀도 요래 어디 인도전에 어디 십자 제우도
So we're in the English here on page 268. No, 269 already. Okay. So there is a query that was covered in the last class, and now we're at the reply. In this case, even our own system accepts as conventionally existent the objects that the opponent apprehends as existing, namely 1, the subject, the I, 2, the reason, that it does not see itself, 3, the example, the pot, and 4, the predicate, that it does not perceive blue and such. So reason does not contradict these. So then this is the thing being explained here is how a reasons based on what the other party accepts are able to work to have the other party, change their view. So we have the other party, the defender, right? The other party is the defender, and here that means that's the essentialists who accept that there is such a thing as establishment by way of nature, or objects that are established by nature, and so they they have this view that there's valid knowledge, valid cognition that is valid with regard to the object comprehended by the valid cognitions, which are seeing things or appearing, they have the appearance of things as though they're established by a nature. So that's their understanding of what valid cognitions are. They're valid with regard to their comprehended objects. And however, what the Prasangikas and Chandrakirti are saying is that object of comprehension does not exist. That kind of object of comprehension is not an established base. It's not established because it is destroyed by, or what's the word? It's harmed by valid cognitions. It's harmed meaning disproven. Okay, that's what we mean by harmed. It's overridden by, it's disproved by valid cognitions. Okay, so however, so I think I'm just trying to figure out the best way to say this phrase, because it's a subtle distinction here. Okay, so however, the reason, the sign, the sign, subject, predicate, the parts of the syllogism that are accepted as being the objects of that valid cognition exist. Okay, So then, however, the object of comprehension of those valid cognitions does not exist. So then the question, the qualm that was asked, or query that was asked in the last class of just this paragraph above, they're saying, so if you're saying, if Chandakirti, the Prasangikas, you want to say that this kind of object of comprehension of such a valid cognition is not established, then how can you use such an object to establish, as the subject, reason, predicate, to establish the view of emptiness, to give rise to the view of emptiness in the opponent's mind. So what the response is saying here is that these parts of the syllogism, right? The subject, as it says here, the I, the reason, that it does not see itself, the example, the pot, the predicate, that it does not perceive blue, and such. Those are conventionally existent. Those are not harmed by valid cognitions. They're not harmed by reasoning. They're not disproven by reasoning. So they are objects of valid cognitions, established by valid cognitions. Those three, there's four parts, right? Or in general, we just say tak chit dun sum, just to literally say the Tibetan, even though it's out of order, they say the reason, subject, predicate, reason, subject, predicate. The three of reason, subject, predicate, those things are existent conventionally. So that's the distinction is that they're the three of the reason, subject, predicate that are the objects accepted to be, what is established by these valid cognitions. Those exist. However, the object of comprehension that is established by those valid cognitions does not exist. That is disproven and harmed by reasoning.
Oh yeah. 대체 연장 치고 대다 랑기 뭐 여바당 여바니 소소 미체베스 대남 랑기 뭐 두비 샤자 자비 체메 두바 롬비 유라 리베 뇌장 쿠유기 탄입에 셰베 뇌바 메바 남기 두베 리베 칼라고 스타 들라다 된다 디가 들어와다 디네가 치무슨 거 알아 다 된다 디네웨 가스나 응어마베르와 아니 가스나 랑게 친이 두바 나웨실라 마주비 치메니든도 되게 최진당 따당 아니 가스나 튠베다 튼졸라 치메니고 말이 투난도 두바 되체 투난스나 다가다 타니도 여바 되체 이나야 치고 딘데베 왕어마와게 와랑 신주바 켈림베 대다기 아니 랑게 오게 여바다 여바니 수수 맞죠 여나 랑게 랑게 친이기 유비캡 랑싱 유비캡스와 랑싱기 메나 아니 메고레 스니다 여바다 랑싱이 여바니 수수 맞치비 내가 인상 대남게 되니 텐데베 되니 체메 되니 주바 되기와 텐데베 체메스로도 되라 랑게 오주비 샤자제베 체메 주바 루비 유라리 비네 장스데 응메 되기와 체메 주바 되비 되라 아니 리베누그레 스디 가스나 랑게 친니 주바 나베 차라 마주비 체메 니된딜라 리베누그레스 이나야 쿠이규기 되니 체마 주비 되나 리베누그 말했으디 응마비 주기 체마디 가리레 베나 응마비 주기 되니 네범에 봤으디 가스나 체주 주주 네범에 봐 로시 많이 비 체마 여러와다 응마비 주기 체메 주비 유라 리베미네 로아티 가스나 응마비 주기 체마스디 체마 양다 바르와디 당응마비 되게 체마스디 랑게 친니 주바 나위차라 마주비 체마지 캐린 거로와 인도자니 응마비 주기로 베나 우마 랑주비 주기 체마디 가리레 단주비 루기 체마 다 하나 샤고로와 랑게 친니 주바 나위차라 마주비 체마 다 하나 샤고로와 다 쿠이 되게 체마디 가리레 랑게 친니 주바 나위차라 마주비 체마 샤고 어떤스나 마주비 체마 샤고레 쿠이 주기 체마디 랑게 친니 주바 나위차라 추비 체마레 인도자니 쿠이 주기 체마당 쿠이 되게 체마니 로와차고레 인도자니 응마비 주비 되게 체마디 베나 응마비 주비 되게로와 응보 자지기 체마디 아니 가리레 마주비 체마되고레 응마비 주기기 되는 응보 주지기 체마디 추비 체마레 추비 체마 인도전에 뭐뭐 규기 체마디 체마양다 인스 뭐뭐 되게 체마디 체마양다 마인스 다 디니시비아 티체레 인도전에 뭐뭐 되게 체마디 가리레 오 랑게 친니 두바 나웨차라 마주비 체마지 샤워레 오 디랑게 친니 두바 나웨차라 마주바 되게로와 체마디기 샤자디 시마주 이내 그 규기 체마기 샤자 규기 내신 아니 최제 달라 소바트도 시주바 인스 어디 티십제신이로와 인도전에 뭐뭐 되게 체마디기 근데 로바스도 뭐뭐게 아니 체메 두바 레세게로와 틴데 체마디 가리레 랑게 친니 두바 나웨차라 마주비 체마지 되원자 랑게 친니 두바 나웨차라 마주비 체메 두바 켈레기 틴디 샤자들라 지비네 뭐마웨기 규기 체메 들어왔더니 뭐마웨 규기 체마디기 두비 되라 지비 미네디 뭐마웨 규기 체메 두비 최디 요치르스 뭐마웨 되기로와 체메 두비 된디 메 가스나 뭐마웨 되기 체마디 가리레 랑게 친니 두바 나웨차라 마주비 체마지레 이자 랑게 친니 두바 나웨차라 마주비 체마지 시마주 우디라 인도산에 딘다 루디라와 타니비 체마이나 아니 랑게 친니 두바 나웨차라 아니 추바지 로와 근데 뭐마웨 랑게 친니 두바 나웨차라 마주바 인소 앞에 루베른 디지기로와 아니 푸마토비 체마디 푸마 랑게 친니 두바 나웨차라 마주바 인소 이나 루베른 디지 주기 체마디기 푸마 랑게 친니 두바 나웨차라 아니 추바 체마리 디가서 타뉴비 루시 자신도 그래 와 인도산에 다 디인도산에 다 디가서 체마들 니차소와 뭐마웨 되게 체마당 뭐마웨 주기 체마니라 제바샤니 뭐마웨 되게 체메 샤자 체마디기 샤자라 리비네 뭐마웨 주기 체메 샤자라 리비미누스 어다 되게 제바요레스 어다 저미지드네 송도 오야
So reason does not contradict these. Nonetheless, since the opponent fails to distinguish between their existing and their existing essentially, reason does contradict the conceit that valid cognition establishes objects that it understands as essentially existent. Still, reason cannot refute what is established by the unimpaired conventional consciousnesses in the opponent's mind stream. So then, this is an extremely essential point to understand. It's an important point that's being made, is that we have the essentialists here, which assert they believe and or accept that the objects of the valid cognitions are objects of valid cognitions, which are unmistaken with regard to the appearance of objects being established by way of their own intrinsic characteristics. So they're saying that and also that the valid cognitions established by way of their own characteristics are, that the objects by way of an essence, and then existence. So existence through an essence versus just existence, or existence with an essence versus existence. So they're not making that distinction, right? So this is the problem that comes for them. So the thing that's being the point that Tsongkhapa is making is that what is not acceptable or not established, in other words, what is harmed by reasoning, is the objects that are established by these kinds of valid cognitions that are accepted to be, right, the valid cognitions established by the essentialists. However, the actual, the valid cognitions within the mental continuums of the essentialists, those are not harmed by reasoning. The objects of valid cognitions within the continuums of the essentialists are not harmed by reasoning. Those are established spaces. Those exist. So it's the thing that doesn't exist is that the essentialists, the valid cognitions as accepted by the essentialists, or the valid cognitions which are accepted by the essentialists. Why? Again, those don't exist because they are the valid cognitions, whatever the ones they accept, valid cognitions which are non-mistaken with regard to the appearance, factor of appearing as the object is being established by intrinsic characteristics. Okay, so that kind of valid cognition and that kind of object, those are disproven or harmed by reasoning. But just that person, that essentialist, right? They're a person, they have within their mental continuum valid cognitions. They do have valid cognitions, and those valid cognitions have objects. So the objects of those valid cognitions are different from the objects of valid cognitions as accepted by that essentialist. Okay, so that's the difference, right? The object of the valid cognition within the mental continuum of the essentialist versus an object of a valid cognition accepted by an essentialist. That's the difference being distinction that Tsongkhapa is pointing out here that we have to understand. So that kind of object, which is just the object established by valid cognition within the continuum of an essentialist, that exists. So just like, again, thinking of Bhava Viveka, that's the main proponent of this Svatantrika view that we're addressing. That's like kind of the basis of this whole section is Bhava Viveka's writings. So he would, say that a pot, for example, right, that there's a valid cognition or knowledge, a consciousness, a knowledge that apprehends a pot, and it is non-mistaken with respect to the aspect of the pot appearing to be established by intrinsic characteristics. However, that doesn't exist, but still Bhava Viveka has in his mind a valid cognition of a pot. Okay, so even though the way he accepts the pot to, the way he accepts valid cognitions, and then the objects of those valid cognitions don't exist, he does have in his mind a valid cognition apprehending pots or a pot. Okay, so that's the difference here. It's the way that the essentialists are asserting the objects of comprehension versus an object of comprehension that is established by a valid cognition within the continuum or the mind of an essentialist. Okay, so that's a distinction that Tsongkhapa is making.
Oh yeah. 대나 쿠이 루당 랑기 루니라 랑기 ngo 주비 샤자자비 tsema tunang도 주바 켈랑 마중베스 랑규 미주바르와 코랑기 켈랑라 가와뜨 바담 제바이누 스타디 가르숭거스나 아니 균zen 되게 지나스 딱 가스나 응어마베와 응어마베 든든히 가리래 나 tseme juba 되게 tsema 샤자라지 비누그레스 이나 응어마베 규기 tsema게 tsema 샤자라지 비누그 말레스 이간라 에바제소와 오다 균zen 딘데 송상 아니 쿠이 루당 스디 랑신 juba 켈랭게 응어마베 루당 랑기 루 탄주베 루니기 니게와 랑고 ngo 주비 샤자라 tsema 투난도 랑기 ngo 주비 샤자 스디 랑기 틴유 주비 샤자라 tsema 투난도 주바시 아니 켈랑 요마레스타 켈레 요마레스 티미 요마르와 가스나 런 ngo 다 랑주바 민지기 아니 tsema 인사we 주라 랑기 틴유 주비 진 최진접이 tsema 진공에 탄주비 룰라이나 tsema이나 랑기 틴유 마주비 최진접이 tsema 진공에 tsema 인사we 주라 tsema이나 랑기 틴유 마주비 최진라 tsema 소위 잡 랑기 틴유 마주비 최진접이 tsema인 비잡 로와 어디 이걸 와다 탄주빌라 랑주바 민지게룰라 tsema 인사we 줄라 랑기 틴유 주비 최진라 랑기 틴유 주비 진이 최진직 아니 자위 tsema지 인거래 인도 전에다 딘데 손상 다 탄주빌 강에 균진할 때에다 응음마비 주기 tsema디 가리래 tsema 양다래 랑기 틴유 마주비 최진라 tsema 송 tsema지래 랑기 틴유 마주비 최진접이 tsema지래 이네 뭐뭐 킬레 침 세마디 가리래 랑기 친니 주비 주전 제비 세마지래 인도 전에다 뭐뭐 가스나 아 되게 세마다 우마 랑주비 되게 세마 투나도 주바지 요 말레스 매장 세마 투나도 주바지 매장 아니 아 가스나 아 된다디 랑जना 디어와다 랑주기 띵지기 고네 아니 지 가리래 아 샤샤 주바 말레스 오 다트니 신자 와 아니 가리래 뭐 코랑기 켈랑라 지네와 내가 코랑기 켈랑라 아니 다 뒤로와 랑주기 띵지 고네 많이 받체 코랑라 잡이 코랑기 켈랑라 지네 아디니 오다 딘디 베티니 띵지라 때네 아니 가와토 말해 수도 그 켈레라 가와토 말해 오 가와토 마이 신자기 띵지 세되기 고네 란다 공하고 니가 치고 당하고 니가 그 투난도 주비 세마지요나 세면이와 세마투난도 샤요나 그 니된 주진지 저라 샤나 랑주기 된지 켈레고르데 루디라 아니 가스나 나 텐데와디 세마투난도 주와 메산 가리래 랑주기 된지 그거 말해스 오나 아니 로도 고에디 가스나 신자기 된지 고네로와 뭐뭐 켈랑 바 쯤라 치네 아니 그비 띵지기 고네 아니 로도 고바 제발해 스리다 신자기 띵지기 고네 로도 고바 제발해 어둑 진다 뭐 네가 수다 내가 쪼다 지름지 십자 숭외디 아니 가리래 세마디 에와체고도와 뭐뭐 유기 세마디 세마이 디랑게 친이 마주비 추제라 세마 숭외 세마레스 랑게 친이 마주비 추진제 세마레 빼나 뭐뭐 분바 또 올라디 랑게 친이 마주비 분바 또 가지 샤워와 이나 코란 쪽에 랑게 친이 주비 분바 또 가지 켈링고 와로와 로와 뭐뭐 코란기 분바 또 바이 수도 랑게 친이 주비 분바 또 가 켈링고 와래 이사 랑게 친이 주비 분바 또 세마 켈링고 와래 이나야 딘데베 랑게 친이 주비 분바 또 세마 디기 샤자 아니 가스나 디 시마 주바인 디라지비 뉴스 다 뭐뭐 주기 세마로와 뭐뭐 주기 되니 분바 또 세마 주요로와 어디 세마디 나지비 미뉴 세마디기 샤자라 지금 민들이 티세메 주비 유 분바티니 랑게 친니 마주비 분바주비 세마 이메치를 데리고 세마디로와 어디 인도산에 다 탄주비 루시샤니 세마이나 가린 걸스나 랑게 친니 마주비 최진접이 세마지 인거레스 인도산에 다 angmo 주기 세마대한 세마로와 로벨린디 주기 세마디 세마 인상 로벨린디 주기 세마디 샤자 가르도 세마레스나 랑게 친니 마주비 샤자도 세마레 랑싱기 마주비 샤자도 세마레 이나양 로벨린디 주기 되게 세마디 티마레 가스나 랑게 친니 주비 샤자도 세마지 로와 인도선달 케바샤소와 로벨린디 주고로시나 로벨린디 주기 세마당 로벨린디 되게 세마니라 케바샤 어디라도 뭐마위 되니 되게 세메 샤자라 주비네 뭐마위 주기 세메 샤자라 주비미네 어디인도전에 당 뭐마위 주기 세마디 가리레 탄주비 되게 세마디 이자 탄주비 되게 세마당 뭐마위 주비 세마 투난도 주바지 매장 안 장주기 땡지 고네 아니 줍자 주바세디 요 말레스 아니 신자게 땡지 점게 고네 신자 가리레 뭐마위 켈랑라 치네 꾸비 땡지라 때네 아니 신자게 땡지 어디기 되니 로도 고바치기레 소다 제르미지 숭도스
Therefore, since that essentialist system and our system do not agree as to whether there is valid knowledge which understands objects to be essentially existent, we do not prove things to them with autonomous arguments. Rather, we simply expose the contradictions within their own assertions. So then we have this sentence here showing that the essentialists, they have this way of accepting or believing objects of knowledge to be established by valid cognitions, and that their way of believing those objects of knowledge to exist is harmed. However, they still have, these essentialists, they still do have within their own continuum, their own minds, valid cognitions, and those valid cognitions do establish their objects. That's the distinction that we're making. So because of that, looking at that reason, then we're now looking at, again, this the way that the essentialists, right, the Madhyamika, the Svatantrika Madhyamikas on down, everyone except for the Prasangikas, they're saying that how do these objects of comprehension exist? They are established by way of their intrinsic characteristics, established by their essence, right? Established from through an essence, or essentially existent, as it says here in the text. So for the Prasangika, then objects of comprehension are objects which are not established by intrinsic characteristics. They're not essentially existent. That's the kind of thing which can be a subject established by valid cognition. So the Svatantrika Madhyamikas on down, except that the objects or the subjects established by valid cognitions and that come to be known by valid cognitions are subjects which are established by their intrinsic identity, intrinsic characteristics. So the two kinds of ways of accepting or believing valid cognition, believing knowledge to be. There's no sort of shared experience, or we use this phrasing of common appearance, or you can say shared experience of these two, right? Between these two parties, between the Prasangika and the Svatantrika on down, all the essentialists, there is no shared experience of the way of believing or accepting valid cognitions to be. So that's why now Tsongkhapa is pointing out so that we do not use autonomous arguments to prove to them things. We simply expose the contradictions within their own assertions, which is to say that we just use these arguments based on what the other party accepts. So argument based on what the other party accepts means that you take the essentialist here, the other party, and then you use their own assertion, their own belief or assertion, and then leading them through their own assertion, pointing out the contradictions in their beliefs. So you point out the contradictions in their view, leading from their own assertions. That's what it means to use an argument based on what the other party accepts. So then there's no shared experience or commonly appearing, subjects or commonly appearing valid cognitions for the challenger and the defender here, these two parties. And so this is why, because we can't, establish or find this commonly appearing shared experience of valid cognition, then there's no need to use autonomous arguments and autonomous reasons. So instead, all we have to do is refute their misconceptions, refute their wrong conceptions. Okay. So again, to reiterate what Tsongkhapa is pointing out is in this distinction between these two, between the distinction he's making is that, let's say, for example, we have a pot and we have some kind of knowledge of pot, right? There's a mind that knows a pot. They're the person who knows a pot. So the essentialist would say that they would assert or accept that the pot is established by its intrinsic identity. And so that means that then the pot is established, that kind of pot, a pot established by its intrinsic identity, is established by valid cognition. So they believe that that's what a valid cognition is. Valid cognition, the knowledge of a pot is a pot that is known by valid cognition to be established by its intrinsic identity. So that doesn't exist. However, this essentialist, they do have knowledge of a pot, right? So their way of believing the knowledge of a pot to be doesn't exist, but their knowledge of a pot exists. So what kind of knowledge of a pot is it? Well, it's knowledge of a pot that does not exist by way of an intrinsic identity.
And then they get the gas.
in or the way that essentialists believe a pot to be the object of a valid cognition, and the comprehended object of a valid cognition does not exist. However, the essentialists' own mental, within their mental continuum, the valid cognition that establishes a pot does exist.
티춘이 ngar kubi shinraki juwa tela tsuna chujin mik tela rangla midawi taani tanyidu yolas ngumbo la soba taa rangi ngo dhubani tela tanyidu mebe ngamadi chima gochidu rungi isin taa karisina tisulusina taa korangi kelengi ani taa yorwa tila chine ani korangi lodo di goba cheba re lawa ina ti gosu kani re isina 다 ngar kubi shenraki juwa tila tsuna sudi ngar taki mik chujin ani kasna tuyandamba shela midade rwa rangla midawi shir pena pumba shin seje rwa tuyandamba pena rangshingi dhubi ngumbola midade da karire tuyandamba shen ngumbola midade ani karire rangla midawi shir pena pumba shin segi tanyidi tindewi da juwa di shiyachini ri tsuna chujin데 가리래 미게 주진 미게라 랑라 미다와 따 랑라 미다와디 탄여도 유스 와디 시주비 추진으로와 미디 아니 미디 랑라 미다와디 시주비 추진으로와 시주바로와 이나야 ngobola sobal라 티니 랑싱기 따와디 ngobola sobal라 랑싱기 따와면 랑을 주비 따와디 탄여도 시마주와로와 디 ngo마위티 ngobola sobal라 랑싱기 따와디 켈링고와로와 ngumbola tawa mase ani rangi tazu de ro thön dambarang singi tagires ro odi tawa di ani lugdila phanye du shima ro ro induzane ta go se de go de karisna ta rangla nasna rangla midawi tala tene ani ngumbola soba shenla ani rangsingi tawa di go ba chebare induzane ngama di chima go je sude ngama karire rangla midawa di gyunzela tene ani chima karire shenla ngumbola soba rangsingi tawadi ngumbola soba la rangsingi tawadi ani goba chebar digires kasna goba chebarisde ngumbola soba la rangsingi tawadi tanidu shima juwarwa ti ta ngumaweki ti shituba chelingorwa ngumbola migdi ani garire rangla midawa injang ngumbola soba la rangsingi tagires lagorwa ti tawadi goba chebares nudilarwa shenrake tizila tene migchujin 퇴연도 시행고보라 소바랑 신기 미다데 랑라 미다위 치르습니다. 랑라 미다위 준진라 때네 아니 시행랑 신기 따와디 고바야. 따고나 딘듯이 탄주고네나 탄주고나 가리 미치진 아니 가리래 아니 랑라 따와다 시행랑 신기 따위 치르 람미로와 아니 달로 철로라샤 철로 달로 샤네 양다기 랑신기 현다기 딘지기 되니 가리래 까에기 담자가리래 응음마요 되어야지 랑싱기 따와디로와 담 미치여진 아니 랑라 따와 임바타 시엔수라 랑싱기 따위 치르스 디로와 탄주체 다 따고 와나 미치여진로와 아니 나로와 시엔고보라 랑싱기 미다데 랑라 미다위 치르스 오다 균젠 딜라 때네 아니 담자 파루비 로도디 고바디 태기레스 인데 로도 가리래 랑싱기 따와디 ngombola rangshingi tawadi gobadi tegires wada doshini sungudu ta mitewadi hola di sungudu
again ta ko dang thoge ko di danda jupcheche dang ta chikware
로래 단줄 거디 가리래 미 최진 아니 네 가리래 랑라 미다와 타 수들 되게 랑라 따와 랑라 미다비 치르 세디 따라 거와 다 저런데는 미치지 랑라 따와 다 신라 랑신기 따위 치르 다바 지당선이 콜라 미두비 타왔던 거로 다 저런 미디 아니 랑라 따와 다 신라 랑신기 따위 치르 어디 코디 미두비 타왔던 거로 다 거디 신라 랑신기 미다데 랑라 미다비 치르 어두시네 응 다 줍지 핀비 탄주라고 때라 다 줍지 핀비 탄주 지시자다 저런 이유나 응.
How is this done? Page 270. How is this done? Let us take the example mentioned above of a syllogism based on what others accept. The reason, i.e., that the subject, the I, does not see itself, does exist conventionally, but essentially seeing things like blue does not exist even conventionally. Therefore, the former can be used to refute the latter. So the reason here is, again, the reason being that is being accepted by the opponent, the essentialist. And so based on that reason accepted by the essentialist, then we're leading them to refute their wrong view. How is this done? So we have, for example, this syllogism here. Take the subject, the I. It does not, right? Take the subject, the I. It does not see other things like blue and so forth because it does not see itself. It does not by way of nature see blue and other things because it does not see itself. So those are all things that are existent conventionally, right? The I, the subject, the I, the predicate, not seeing other things by way of a nature, and then not seeing things like blue and other things by way of a nature, and then the reason not seeing itself. Because of not seeing itself, those things are established conventionally. So this is, again, the thing that is being put here as the predicate is like blue and those other things, right? Not seeing them by way of a nature, because the essentialist here, the opponent, they assert or believe that the eye does see other things like blue, etc., naturally, or by way of its nature. They see the blue and other things. So in other words, it intrinsically sees blue and other things. Now, when the line here, the sentence here says, the former can be used to refute the latter here. So again, the former is the not seeing itself. That's the reason, right? Not seeing itself. And then the latter is seeing other things by way of a nature, seeing blue, etc., by way of a nature. So the former, not seeing itself, can be used to refute that the eyes see other things like blue, etc., by way of a nature. So the belief, again, of those essentialists is that even though the eyes don't see themselves, they do see other things intrinsically or by their nature. Now, when we have these this kind of reasoning here, we could also use a consequential syllogism that projects or propels the thing to be established. Okay, so what does that mean? So here we have the basic reason as stated was, take the subject, the eyes, they do not see other things like blue and so forth intrinsically because they do not see themselves. So the way you would posit then or state this kind of consequential syllogism would be if you take the reverse of the predicate and the reverse of the reason, and then you put them, and then you reverse the two positions. So to state it, just to make it clear, you would say, take the subject, the eyes, it follows that they do see themselves because they intrinsically see other things. Okay, that's called a consequential syllogism, which propels the object to be established. Okay, or the thesis. Okay, the thesis or something like that. So that's how you would phrase it differently to make it into a consequential syllogism. So again, yeah, so okay, that was it. This one.
Oh yeah. 미라 따테다 당스 가지치 디니 유나 유념다 메나 메념도 소나 디니 누자 누지 저 칼라룽 스타트인다디 최제 미기 땡도와 아니 가리래 따랑라 미다와 저와 따랑라 미다와 디당 따라 강데 따랑라 미다와디 타니도 시주 셰라 랑싱이 따와디 타니도 시마주와 인 디인상 아니 랑라 미다위 따라 때네 셰라 랑시 따와디 고그레스 라르와 다 딘데 많이 받지 아니 추제 미기 땡도와 랑라 미다와당 셰라 랑싱이 따와니 아니 유나 유념다 맨나 메념 스비가리래 랑라 미다나 아니 랑라 루아 무슨지 랑라 미다와디 유나 셰라 랑싱이 따와디 요레스 셰라 랑싱이 따와디 메나 랑라 미다와디 메고레스 미다 따당 가지 취디로와 따드당 가지 취디 유나 유념레 메나 메념레스니 되와이나 되게 딩마이 되고로와 어디 되나 아니 늦제 스니 콘주룰라 늦제 되니 가서 랑라 미다와디 늦제당 아니 그 셰라랑 신기 따와디 늦자는 거 말이 그 되고래 다 랑룰라 랑라 미다웨 따라 때네 셰라랑 신기 따와디 고고래 고바 제와인상 아니 셰라랑 신기 따와디 같이 주 셰라랑 신기 따와디 매장 랑라 미다와디 예스 인도자는 미라 따테 같이 주단 디니 유나 따가리래 랑라 미다와디로와 같이 주 셰라 우볼라 소발랑 신기 따와디로와 디니 아니 유나 유념다 메나 메냐 마레스 기시이나 군이 노전누지 우마레 랑라 미다위 따라 때네 셰라랑신 따와디 고투구 마레스 이상 군이 유나르와 미랑라 추지 미기 땐도 랑라 미다와디 유장 셰라랑신 따와디 매장 아니 셰라랑신 따와디 고바치고레스다 nendakin shiraki tinziki la tene ane tamjago se temja dene parubi deyogi shena rangshingi tawa jorowa shengubo la rangshingi tawa di ane goba chibi goche du rangla midawa di kukuwari nduzane rangla midawa taa di parubi ke lemba insan di rangi parubi ke lembi taa la tene ane korangi tamja di goba cheba sinza shiraki tinziki deyondi o tinziki deyomudu usu
Therefore, the former can be used to refute the latter. In the case of the eye, one, the reason not seeing itself, and two, the predicate of the refutation, not seeing other things, are either the same in that both exist or the same in that both do not exist. So how could either contradict the existence of the other? Therefore, in a syllogism based on others' acceptance, the subject, predicate, and reason must be things that exist conventionally. The mere fact, okay, so the yuna mena mena mares labora.
마레스 다 그런 뭐 마음이 레스 거와 랑라 미다와당 셰라 랑싱기 따와디로와 랑라 미다와디 유 셰라 랑싱기 마데와 셰라 랑싱기 따와디 유스 거와 루디라 랑라 미다와 유장 셰라 랑싱기 따와디 요 마레스 같이 최대당 다디 다 같이 최다 다디리다 같이 최다 다디 윤냐 메네 마레스 다디 랑라 미다와디로와 셰라 랑싱기 다디 랑라 미다웨시라로와 그래서 다랑라 미다와디당 가지 최 랑싱기 따와디로와 미다데 스디 가지 최 랑싱기 따와디 까고로와 가지 최 디로와
So the explanation again I was giving in the wording in the English here are a bit different. So I'm not quite sure, a little bit tough to figure out how to explain what's written here. But so I'll just try to say what Geshe said. Okay, so within the on the basis of this subject, which is the eyes, right? In case of the eye, it says, so we have the reason not seeing itself. And then we have the predicate, right? The predicate not seeing other things naturally. But then we also have what's called the reverse of the predicate, okay? the reverse of the predicate, or the refuted predicate. The refuted predicate. So the refuted predicate is seeing other things naturally, right? Seeing other things naturally. So if it were the case that they both, when one exists, they both have to exist, and if one doesn't exist, then they both have to not exist, right? Then they, then one would not be able to work as the sort of proof to override the other. In other words, to be able to refute the wrong view, to be able to refute the predicate, the reverse of the predicate. The reason would not be able to refute the reverse of the predicate if they had to be the case where when one exists, the other exists. So this is what it says is in the English here, it says are either the same and that both exist, or the same and that both not exist. So one doesn't exist, then both must not exist. Now that's what the essentialist believes, right? They believe if not seeing itself doesn't exist, then seeing things naturally doesn't exist, right? And if seeing things naturally exists, and if not seeing itself exists, then seeing things naturally exists. They believe it that way. So, but that's not the case. So that's why we can actually use. It's not the case that if one exists, both must exist, and if one doesn't exist, both must not exist. So, because again, the thing being disproven is that the thing that's being overridden is that things naturally see themselves, right? Naturally see other things. That the eye naturally sees other things, not naturally seeing other things. That's what the reverse of the predicate is. Okay, so it's in other words, the refuted predicate. Okay, so that's why again this is the way that these arguments based on what the other party accepts function, is that you can use the reason to refute the refuted predicate, or the opposite of the predicate. Sorry, here it's yeah. So I mean yeah, that's correct. So then you're taking the argument based on what the other party accepts, means that you're taking the other party, the thing that they accept as the reason, they accept the reason, and you're using that to sort of guide or lead them to be able to refute the wrong view, which is again the opposite of the predicate, the refuted predicate.
Oh yeah. 대나 신라기 주비 추진당 최당 다는 단위도 요바시 그게 그 요바 캐랑바 점금이 주고 다든다 신라기 좋아라도 파르비 캐랑라 티네 그비 좋아지스고 와인도 전에 다 딘데와디 파르비 캐랑바 점금 지기로 해서는 지기 말해 디 신라기 딘지기 추진당 다당 주지 최당 팀배도 단위도 요바지고 그래 스페나 미추진스도 미 단위도 요바 시주바로와 아니 신라랑싱 미다와 수도 주지체로와 신라랑싱 미다와데 단위도 여러와 아니 랑라 미다웨 치르스 따랑라 미다와데 단위도 여러와 어디 아니 페나 품바신 세데 품바 단위도 여러와 인도자니 따주듯은 아니 랑로라양 단위도 여바지고 그래 우마 단위도 룰라양 단위도 여러와 곧 따주 되었음과 시주바지고 그래 마도지기 바로베 케랑바 짬기 아니 조금 아래스 로 파르빌 쾌랑 받점기 주고에나 아니 랑게 친유 주비 다주도 좀 샤워시 거와 이상 다 파르비 쾌랑 받점 많이 봐 아니 탄주불로라야 탄유도 시주 봐지 거래 어딘지 된지라 신라기 좋아시 거르마도 지기 아니 지 파르비 쾌야 신라스데 신 파르발라 쾌랑라 친네 거베 된지라도 아니 파르비 쾌랑 받점기 샤고르베스 디 샤고 마레스 대한 디 초고 마레스 랑루라 탄예도 다주듯습니다. 빼라서 봐 시주바지 고거래 신라게 딘지스디 어떻게 신이다 다디 인지라 갈 수가 있으나 신라게 딘지스나 간레레스 신라게 딘지기 지네디 가리르스나 신기 담자 고바체 버레스 담자 가리 고바체 버스나 갑디리 아니 랑신기 따와디 미야로와 rāngla mītāwī tālā tēne xiānlā rāngshīngi tāwā tī gōpa chī gōwa rī xiāngi rwa xiān ngōmbo la sōpa la tā tī kēlēn tī sūyō rē ngōma wā rwa ngōma wē mīk tī anī xiān ngōmbo la sōpa la rāngshīngi tāwā tī kēlēn gōwa rī nizā rānglu kī tī rāngshīngi tāwā tī kā gōwa rī rwa ngōmbo mīk tī anī kāsana xiān ngōmbo la sōpa la rāngshīngi mītā tī rāngla mītāwī chī rī xiāngi kēlēn tī gōpa tī 아니 가스나 신라기 딘지기 건데 고바 지고래 심드니 다 신라기 딘지기 제례당 뭐다 강가다 디돔니 숭우도
Therefore, okay, sorry. So how could either contradict the existence of the other? Therefore, in a syllogism based on others' acceptance, the subject, predicate, and reason must be things that exist conventionally. The mere fact that an opponent claims that something exists is not adequate. So the argument based on what the other party accepts is where you have the other party and you're using, again, the reason and the argument based on the reason that they accept and guiding them or leading them to overcome a misconception. So the point that Tsongkhapa is making here is that just accepting, just the fact that an opponent accepts something is, and using that in the syllogism, in the argument, that's not adequate. Just believing in or accepting something to exist is not adequate to be able to use it in an argument based on what the other party accepts. The subject, the eyes, in this case, right? The subject, the eyes, predicate did not naturally see themselves or intrinsically see themselves. Sorry, that's not the predicate. Once again, the subject, the eyes, the predicate do not intrinsically see blue and other things. The reason, because they don't see themselves. The example, like a pot. Those things, they all have to conventionally exist, to be conventionally existent for the prasangika as well. Okay, so they have to be conventionally existent in our or the prasangika understanding as well. So it's not enough just that the other party just accepts them to exist. If that were the case, then you could use in the argument, you could use for your subject, reason, predicate, or reason, subject, predicate, you could use eyes and so forth, things that are established by intrinsic character, right? You could use those as your as the parts of your argument, the reason, subject, predicate. So it's not enough just to accept them. They have to actually exist conventionally. And the function of an argument based on what the other party accepts is to refute and overcome the mistaken conceptions of the opponent, of the other party. And here, sort of, what is the argument based on what the other party accepts? Again, here you have take the subject, the eyes, right? They do not intrinsically see blue and other things because they don't see themselves. For example, a pot. Okay, so that's the actual argument here. So just a kind of review what the purpose or function of the argument based on what the other party accepts is, and then here in this example, what is the sort of the main, what is the basic kind of nature of such an argument. This is what is being reviewed here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
그래서
그래서
어두체 추진 미라 소바 대다 요바 코랑기 켈렘베스 우마베 대다 주바 갈라고스 가데 대라 뉴네 코자라 마주바 주시 제 세나니 아니 민뉴바 가야 메베 대다당 쯧바라 제부 메베 디도 수식이 제스다 된다 담 kuy keran la chi ne kuy damja goba asidi kelen de karire rāngā mītāvī shir, sirvā rāngā mītāvī, mīk rāngā mītāvī tāla tēne, shēngō bōla rāngshīngi tāwā tī gōgā chī gōrwa, tā rāngā mītāvā tī, anī kui kēlīng gōrwa, mīk lā sōpa tētā yobā khurāngi kēlīng sūtī, mīk tī, chūjī mīk tīndū, rāngā mītāvā tī yobā tī kui kēlīng dērwa, kēlīng gōrwa. Tā kēlīng līngi lā, tarōng mīk rāng tā, shēlā rāngshī tāwā gōbi gyūnzē lā mīk rāngā mītāvā tī, kui gōi nā rāngā mītāvā tī, tīni dhūgō rē, tīni sī uzu jāwā yinā, kui kēlīng līngi lā, rāngā mītāwā yīmbā kē līngi līngi lā rāngā mītāwā tī dhūgō mārīs, dhūgō yu na, tarō dhūgō rēs, uzu jāgō yu na, tā dī kō nyōmbā yīmbī tā jī kālā wā, tā gyūnzēn hā kūgō kūgō lā, tarō gyūnzēn tī dhūbjē kō shō sī nā lāgō yu na, tā dī nyōmbā tā wā chā tī rā, tīndē anē bē lō sū mīnē kē tīndē, tīndē lā tsūpa chē, tīndē sū hāñchī tsūpa chī kī mārīs. 인상 코랑기 켈랑라 티네 아니 코랑기 티니 가자디 아니 가두 통용도 티니 신이 티니 콜라 티니 디 두자 주에기 세마게 고갑지 요레스 다들 틴데 왜디니 켈랑라 티네 티니 담자 고 투구투구라 다른 켈랑기 티니 두제 고거를 나와이나 코랑기 켈 가르를 미랑라 미다와디 켈링링이라 랑라 미다와 이미 균제 앉아 두고 나와이나 티니 균제 통매 자주고를 아니 코트 버튼이 주고 말 코다 가르스로 딘데 랍겐지 요나 티다 녀바힘이 따레스 다 딘데라 아니 로스우르네 바수한지 좀 지기 말레스 인두자니 다 코랑기 켈랑 바디라 균진도 제네 아니 코랑기 켈랑 치마디 고바 제와디 아니 디고레스 가스나 미랑라 미다와디 켈렌데로와 미디랑니 라니라 미다와 임바디 켈레나 아니 신라랑 신기 따와디 용우 말레스 게시신 랑라드니 신라랑 신기 따와 요나 아니 미랑라 미다와데 티니 메바 주그레스 랑라 따고레스 와 다 탄주고 거네 다 가야지 시고래 다 둘러도 가리래 미디 셴라 랑싱이 미다와 이미 균센들 랑라 미다와레 도와스네 계시 랑라 라니라 따 두고요나 아니 셴라 랑싱이 따 가리진 따 두고 말해 셴라 랑싱이 따 두고레스 다 가리요 말했어 랑라 미다와 랑라 따와디 요 말해 미 코랑라 따와디 메와디 갔으나 코랑 따에게 깨디 뛰어서기 시디 매장 다 투기면도 와스 이상 다 뛰메기 따주지면은 셴라랑 신게 따와디야 요 말에 셴라랑 신게 따나 아니 셴라랑 뛰메기 따주지 요거래 뛰메기 따주지 매장 셴라랑 신미 따와디 고와디 아니 랑라 뛰메기 따주 매장 랑라 미다 쓰기도 어다 균전 디레스 균전 딜레 윤데 다른 균전디 주제 신다 주고 그러나 아니 고쳐봐야 하면 차고래 딘녀바도 오지다 고츠바 뚜니마도 로스뉴 미딩에 차고래 인다 딘데 라게 용구 말레스 딘데 라와이나 아니 디지바 마위딘 쪼바디 두고 말레스 다 제르미지 오 두우치네 다 신기 신다게 딘지기 고네 아니 신기 켈레 고단디 아니 오 딘데지 고네 딘 고이 켈레마디 가리레 미랑라 미다와디 켈레마디 호랑 켈링고로 다 켈레인데 랑라 미다와디 가스나 랑라 따위기 뛰어서기 게임 멘두라로 얘는 신라야랑 신기 따기 말에 신라 뛰메기 따수 멘두와 소다 두우시니 아니 담자디 까한 거레스 어디 두우시니 인다디 신라기 딘지기다 고바디 시행도스
The opponents themselves accept the existence of those subjects, such as the I, as well as the reasons and examples. Therefore, why should the Madhyamaka have to prove them? If they dishonestly disavow what they actually accept and say, since they are not established for us, please establish them, that would mean that there is nothing that they were not prepared to disavow, and it would be pointless to argue with them. Who could ever help them? So we're using this argument based on what the other party accepts in order to take an accepted reason that is accepted or believed by the other party, and then to lead them to see another thing they accept, the refuted predicate, the other thing they accept, to see that it is mistaken, or in other words, to help them refute it, right? So that's what the function of this argument based on what the other party accepts is. Now we're looking at, again, this syllogism here, where we say take the subject be I's, and then et cetera, et cetera. So on the basis of the I's, then we have the reason not seeing itself. Those are accepted by the other party, right? They accept the existence of I's. They accept that they don't see themselves. That's the reason. Now, if someone, so you're actually like in a debate with this kind of essentialist and they're defending, that means they're answering your question. So if you then state, or they're answering to your arguments. So if you state this reason, oh, the eyes fouls, that you say that I take the eyes, they don't see other things by intrinsically because they don't see themselves. And then if they kind of say, like, just kind of insist that, oh, I don't accept that reason. Please give me a better, another reason to establish that the eyes don't see themselves. Okay, so this is what Tsongkhapa is saying here. Is saying, okay, right? Why should the Madhyamaka have to prove them? So that's already accepted by the other party. So then if someone goes and says, oh no, I don't believe that, you have to also go and prove that the eye doesn't see it. The eyes don't see themselves. So that's just showing that such a person, they're not an unbiased thinker. They're not what to say, yeah, that's a fine way to say it. They're not really interested in thinking through the argument and working through it. They're just being stubborn, kind of. They're not being unbiased debater. They're not being a sincere, they don't have, you could say, they're not being sincere in their response because they're just right there. So the point here is that it should be enough to just lead the person based on a reason that they already accept, right? And then allow that to, let them think through it so that they're actually able to see the contradiction in their views and in their positions, and then go on to, refute the predicate to be refuted. So then if you just say, no, you have to give another reason to prove that reason that you just stated, to prove that the eyes don't see themselves. Again, that's sort of not, that's like not a sincere or not an unbiased partner in the debate. So so again, what we're doing is we're reason that they do accept to lead them to, right, refute or overcome the the thing that they accept, which is a misconception. Okay, and once they do that, that's enough. Okay, that's enough. They don't need to give other reasons to prove every part of the argument. And so, like, now, again, how is this working? Why does giving that as the reason, which they accept, why does that allow them to see the contradiction in their view? Well, because we have the basic, meaning here, right? Their belief that eyes see blue and other things intrinsically, but they don't see themselves. So if the thing is, if they saw other things intrinsically, that would mean they would see them in a way that is non-contingent. They would be able to see things without contingency on other conditions. Then they should be able to, or they must be able to then see themselves, right? If seeing was something intrinsic to the eye, something by the eye's very nature, it could just see, that means it could see without conditions, right? Without being contingent or having conditions. So this way of seeing without conditions then would allow it to see itself as well, because it could see anything. It has no conditions needed to see. So this is why, because such a way of seeing that's non-contingent or without conditions doesn't exist, right? Then it's possible for the eyes to not see themselves, because the only way of seeing anything is a contingent way, right? There's no non-contingent way of seeing. So then, because it's possible for the eyes to not see themselves, that proves that the eyes don't have this conditionless or non-contingent way of seeing. So they don't have an intrinsic way of seeing, so they can't intrinsically see blue and other things. So again, that's the purpose of using this argument based on what the other party accepts. This is what's being stated here, is that it's kind of restating or giving more detail about the purpose of the argument based on what the other party accepts.
아야, 어떤 된다데 디리 가진 날에 가대 8월에 랑라 미다와당 원보소 셴라랑 신기 랑기 뭐 주변랑 신유바 되발라 가와 뛰면은 가와 치시에스 가와 임바 체메 두나 니가라 줍고베 셴라자 셰바 셰 미차오 스타트인데 단 도바 사와지를 가정 제름시 송소와 현장의 딘지디 아니 담자 고바디 아니 하마고는 디 추조도 인자디 내가 친구도 신개와 시긴 소인데 다저바 디 강들라 저본디 가리르스나 현장의 딘지기 되라 저바지 총소와 현장의 딘지로와 신기 계란 제반의 딘의 세마디 샤자라지 빈누기리 컨디션 두구르스니 여기 저바디 빵네 디가서 현장의 딘지기 제례당 어디 시행도 다 된다 디 신작의 딘지기 타니라 단 저바지 양 저바 파마지 신작의 딘지기 타니 에 강데 되라 저바 중에 저바디 뽕화체 다디 타니라 양 저바지 왜 딘지 저바지 저와 다 신작의 딘지기 세디기 야니 가와tumbi 딘지기 라워레스 신기 켈란 라티니 로아 신기 켈렘비 딘지기 라테네 코랑기 켈렌디라 가와tumbi 딘지기 라고레스 가데 파루베랑라 미다와당 ngubolasewa shela rang tawa rang ngo duba rang shi yoba doba la gawa tumba ina sudita karire shenda ge tinsi digi shingi kelan la gawa tungo re larwa gandla gawa karire rang la mida we ta la tene shela rang shingi tawa di yungu mare shela rang shingi tawa dang rang la mida wa ni ani gawa re rang la mida na shela rang shingi mida wi chabi re shela rang la mida wa yin shela rang shingi tawa re sidi gawa re gawa tungo chedu 다 신나게 된지 구고로 인도전에 다 된데왜 가와 이마데 칼리스 하고 그래 다 가지기 쨘바디로 디 가와 이마데 칼리스 하고 그래 가와 이마데 세메 두나 니가게 세메 두 버스 나고기야 아니 다 구겐기야 가와 이마 세메 두다 고서 그 고와 디기야 가와 이마 세메 두고나 아니 니가라 두고고나 신자스 댄식스니 신 코나라 잡바스니 가르친 라기레스 신라게 댄식라는 드기민도 무슨다 타니에들라로 쨘바 고가리 로와 신라게 댄식 셰와 미차우스 가스나 신라게 댄식 디기 가와뚜미 댄식지레 신기 케나나 가와뚜디 가와디 세메 두고디 가와뚜응기 나고다 가와뚜사기 치고 니가게 되니 가와이바 세메 두고나 니가라 두비 주바지레 신 잡바스 신 주보라 잡바스디 댄식이 명데 땅의 드기민도 있습니다 타니라 쨘바지레샤 때디 나 쨘바 파마지 로와다 딘데 람나야 쨘바 딘데 추나야 아니 디큐메 바레 스타디오라 렌디 추요
Objection. You claim to expose a contradiction between the opponent's assertion that the eye does not see itself and the opponent's assertion that the eye, seeing blue and such, has an essential or intrinsic nature. But what kind of cognition understands the contradiction? If it is a valid cognition that establishes the contradiction, it would have to establish it for both parties, so it would not be based on what others accept. I think that's basically up to where I'll just read the whole thing and we can read it again later. So if you posit the contradiction simply by its being asserted, since the opponents accept the eye is not seeing it itself and it's seeing something else as non-contradictory, it is untenable to use their assertion to posit a contradiction. If you posit them as contradictory on the basis of your own assertion, this leads to utter absurdity. How can you say to the opponents that it is incorrect for them to accept these two positions as non-contradictory because you assert that they are contradictory? So really, this is now a kind of argument or qualm that is, or objection that is coming up. It's a fresh one, but it's coming up based on simply the term, right? The term of the argument based on what other parties accept. So you see, he's kind of points out, he puts in quotes, if it is a valid cognition that establishes the contradiction, it would have to establish it for both parties, so it would not be based on what others accept. So he's sort of just taking an objection to the phrasing of this kind of argument. So the other arguments that were addressed earlier were really more about the actual, like the function of these arguments, and then their kind of basic nature, or sort of just what they are. Those arguments were addressed earlier above. So now there's an argument here about this. There's just the phrase itself, the phrase that of arguments based on what the other party accepts. So what these are, they're reasons, right? They're reasons or arguments which are meant to elucidate the contradiction in another person's view, right? They're meant to show the person their contradiction. Now we have this example, of course, going back to the example, the eyes don't see themselves. That's the reason, right? Not seeing themselves. Then the thing that it's contradictory to, is intrinsically seeing other things. Okay, so seeing itself, not seeing itself, and intrinsically seeing other things are contradictory. That's the contradiction that we're pointing out by using this argument. So now the question is, how would the other party kind of come to understand this, right? That doesn't make sense. What this argument or objection is saying is it doesn't make sense to say what the other party accepts because they don't accept both of those things, right? They don't accept that the eyes don't see themselves intrinsically. Since they don't accept both of those things, why are you saying based on what the other party accepts? Okay, so that's sort of the basic objection here. So then Tsongkhapa is going to, show in the response why there's no problem here with this phrasing that of argument based on what the other party accepts. So.
다 켈랑베 가와 존나니 랑라 미다와당 셴라 따와 니 바로베 니 미가와 되라 티 켈랑기 가와 조바 미텔라 쓴다 다 쯧바 니와디 다 되게 체메 주비 가와 임바 체메 주바이나 아니 응하고 치고 니가기 체메 주고 한자 신다스는 지금인도 우지다로와 다 체메 주바 많이 받지 켈랑베 고네더니 디 가스나 샤교이나 아니 진다 디 가리래 랑라 미다와당 셴라랑 싱게 따와니 가와 임바디 응마비 켈링 마레스 랑라 응마베 미디 랑라 미다와 인장 셴라랑 싱게 따기레 스니로와 미 랑라 미다와당 셴라랑 싱게 따와니 가와 임바 되고 마리 미가와 되고레스 미가와 되데 미디 랑라 미다와 인장 셴라랑 싱게 따와 임바디 켈링 비치르스 셴몬볼라 와 와다 탄주비룰라 미디 셴몬볼라 따기리데 랑싱게 따기 마레스 로아 미랑라 미다와단 신라랑 싱게 따와니 아니 가스나 가와레 탄주비딜 라고르와 당 켈랑게 고네 샤와는 뭐마베 미랑라 미다와단 신라랑 싱게 따와니 아니 가와이바 켈링이 마레스 아니 쿠이드니 켈랑게 고네 다 간다라디 가와 때마디 디기민도 민데데 치고 뭐마베 미랑라 미다와단 신라랑 싱게 따와니 가와이바 미데데 미디 랑라 미다와야 되 셰라 랑싱게 따와야 켈림베시르 로와 인두스네 셴고볼라 랑싱게 따와당 랑라 미다와니 시드임바 되그레 가와임바 켈링 마레스 인두스네 인다 신라게 텐지기 시디 켈랑게 고네 가와 켈랑비 고네 샤와이나 아니 고에마와라 가와 켈랑야 민두스 인두스네 어디 다 도바니와 티제
Okay, so let's try to go back into it because Geshe sort of going slowly through this paragraph. I read the whole thing, but let's see. So here, but what kind of cognition understands the contradiction? If it is okay, okay. So if it is a valid cognition that establishes the contradiction, it would have to establish it for both parties. So it would not be based on what others accept. So this was actually, I think, this was more what Geshe explained the previous segment, where what's happening here is they're sort of giving a couple options. Like, what is it that you're saying is what the other party accepts, right? What is the thing being accepted by the other party? So the first option or the argument is are they accepting that there's a valid cognition that's establishing that's establishing the contradiction here, well, then that doesn't make sense because the other party doesn't have a valid cognition of the contradiction, right? They believe that if they accept that the eyes cannot see themselves, yet still see other things intrinsically. So now the second option is if you posit the contradiction simply by its being asserted. So the first was if it's validly with a valid cognition. The second, by its being asserted. Okay, since the opponent accepts the eye is not seeing itself and it's seeing something else as non-contradictory, it is untenable to use their assertion to posit a contradiction. Okay, so again, so it's this option now is, according to this objection, this person giving the objection is also not adequate or not appropriate to use the phrase based on what other party accepts, because they don't accept this contradiction. They accept that the eyes both don't see themselves and naturally or intrinsically see other things. So they don't see or accept this contradiction, right? That's the essentialist position. So how can we call it an argument based on what the other party accepts when they're not accepting this contradiction? They don't see it or know it through a valid cognition. They also don't accept it. Again, for the for the Umatogirba or the Prasangika, that's Tsongkhapa and in our own position, then the eyes, right, not seeing themselves and seeing other things intrinsically are contradictory, right? So it's for the Prasangika that's accepted, but for the essentialist, that contradiction is not accepted. So then they're saying, so then why is it, well, then it's not appropriate to use this expression based on what the other party accepts.
오야 어두체 다랑기 가와 켈랑바 조나니 하장 테데 치골라 큐기 디 미가와 되바 미리데 코요디다 가와 켈랑베시로 시에 지달 마르 냠나 큐엔티니 메데 랑라 미다나 랑기 우 두베 랑시 요바 가와니 츠메 두베 켈랑마 좀 미초고 스타틴다 디 토바 숨바디 가스나 다든다 치고기 응어뭐 켈랑바 있는 거 가와 켈랑이 말해서 라르와다 다 나고기 디네 나고 우마베로와 우마 탄주베로와 아니 랑기 가와 켈랑바 짬기 고네 아니 디네 가스나 디 바로발 가와 때 바세와 있나 아니 하장 대기도 가지기로 하장 대대 아니 가니스니 치고라 디네 치고 응어마라 켈랑기 가와 두바 미데와다 얘기 미가와 켈랑베 치스니 가니스라 두그레스티 어디 랍 투마르와스 어 딘디 진상 다 딘다디 신라기 제바 수디르와 아니 체메 두비 고네르와 가와 신라기 제바디 가스나 가와 조바 세디 가와 뚜디 아니 가와디 체메 두비 고네샤나 디기민도 켈랑비 고네샤나 디기민도 스네 제바 쯔인데 다 디규메데 랑라 미다나 아니 랑고 두비 랑시 유바 가와니 치 체메 두바레스 켈랑비 고네샤기 마레스 다 렌디르다 그러와 랑라 미다나 아니 랑이 내려와 미 랑라 미다나 아니 랑신기 셰라 여바 고바디 체메 주바레 체메 주비 고네와 치고 고네 말에 나고 고네 말에 지적 주바스 지 체메 주비 고네 간레스나 랑라 미다와디 께그 마청 요원기 랑라 미다와라 와스 이나디니 셰라양 아니 내려와 띨메기 따주지 간레스 용거래 요 말에서 오다 디메바디 체메 주비 고네 아니 가와 치메 주비고네 아니 샤기제 마도 지 켈랑비고네 샤고 말했으니 다 레인디 독신이다 쯧바디 레소와 쯧바디 신라기 제바기 아니 가와 뜸바이나 가와디 치메 주비고네레 켈랑비고네레스 켈랑와이나 치고기 켈랑이 말했으니 되게 줘서 할 쯧바 니비가서 다 쯧바 수미가서 나고 라니기 켈랑비 가와디 켈랑비고네 샤나 아니 치고라 켈랑기 가와 켈레미리데 얘기 저랑게 로와 미가와 켈레미리데 예 가와 켈레베치스나 디 가네스는 용물에 했으니 다 도르스드나 신라게 제바기 탄니디 지기민도 쇠바디 쇠인데 오다 딘다와디 아니 가스나 체메드 가와 체메드 비고네 아니 신라게 제바디기 가와 떼스고 얼마도 지기 켈랑바 좀비고네 셰기 마레스 오다 렌디네시니다 쯧본디 렌디네 립샤스
If you posit the contradiction simply by its being asserted, since the opponents accept the I is not seeing itself and it's seeing something else as non-contradictory, it is untenable to use their assertion to posit a contradiction. Okay, so we went through that one. If you posit them as contradictory on the basis of your own assertion, this leads to utter absurdity. How can you say to the opponents that it is incorrect for them to accept these two positions as non-contradictory because you assert that they are contradictory? Reply, our position does not suffer from this fault. That the I does not see itself contradicts its having an essential or intrinsic nature. Valid cognition establishes this contradiction, so it is not posited through simply being asserted. Okay, so there's a third kind of option or objection that's being raised, right? Here it's saying, so the first one was, if what is it, what are you saying based on what the other party accepts, right? If you're saying again, the whole point is to point out the contradiction, right, in the view of the other party. So saying, so do they see and know this contradiction with a valid cognition? Well, then that doesn't make sense because they don't see the contradiction. Are you saying that they accept the contradiction? And that's what do you mean by based on what the other party accepts? Well, that also doesn't make sense because they don't accept the contradiction. So now you're saying, so now they say, well, what if, right? It says, if you posit them as contradictory on the basis of your own assertion. So now they're saying, so are you saying then that this kind of argument is just based on the challenger, right? The challenger, the prasangika, your own position, what you accept. Then if you're saying that's what it's based on, then that's utterly absurd. Then right there, that makes no sense whatsoever because now there's nothing to do with what the other party accepts. You're just saying it based on what you as the challenger accept. So that's the third kind of option that this objection is raising and then pointing out, so that this phrase or term doesn't make sense. An argument based on what the other party accepts. So this is then given the response under it, Jiren Pache is saying that our position does not suffer from this fault or any of those faults, because why? We're not saying that that it's what he's saying is that it's just that this contradiction is established by valid cognitions in general. That it's just a fact. It's established by knowledge, by valid knowledge that not seeing, because there's right. So I guess if there was, some intrinsically seeing of other things, then there would be a non-contingent way of seeing. And so how could there be a non-contingent way of seeing if the eyes don't see themselves, right? So the eyes not seeing themselves is showing that the eyes cannot see other things intrinsically. There's a contradiction that's just established by valid knowledge, valid cognition in general. Okay, so it doesn't have to be established by the valid cognition of the opponent. It doesn't have to be on the other party. It doesn't have to be established by what the other party believes or accepts, this contradiction, and it doesn't have to be established, based on what our party or the challenger accepts. It's just established by valid cognitions. So that's why that fault doesn't apply.
뭐야, 다 도시는 다 된다 뒤 연결라. 아니, 다 지금 저기 현장의 띵식 세대 다 개심무 시우지 인상 지시 된다. 저번당 집에군들이 시작하는도 가서는 개심무 인바디 돈유도 배 따와디 띵식지라 띵이 예버도 띵식 그거는 현장의 띵식마도 그래서요 말레스. 다 현장의 띵식을 땡거는 현장의 띵식은 컨디지레 스나인데 아니 디디 마트시 잡단디 저번미다 니고네. 그러와 어지 퇴라 저바지 랩 저바디 뻥외게 되네 여기 지 가지래 신기 켈런을 치니 되는 신나게 띵식라기래 스나도 다 된다 디갑수 아니 네 단위를 저바 뻥와지 그러와디 신자 띵식 되는 디 가와 띵교에나 다 가와 신기 로도 고바 제와이 나라와 로도 고바 니 신기 가와 뛰비고 로도 고고라와 인사 가와 뛰는데 가와디 아니 뭐 치고 니가기 쳔메 주바레 계랑 말했으니 쯧바디레디 아니 신자기 딘지기 다니엘라 디네 하 쯧바디 바 뽕이고네 다 된다도도 계랭 말한조 하고 고야디 신자기 딘지스나 간지지라 쓰기도스 신자기 딘지 고비 고바 가리도스 중재 가리도 또 디다 띵가서 셰고 조어디 디 낭된데 조자데다 디 셰와치고레스 이두자니 다 쯧바디 고야디 된다고 최와레 모두 지 쯧바드라 때네 무지다 제무지기다 제시 교여디 아니 다 신자기 딘지기 고다 줘야지도 아니 디 쯧바나 제비고네 마송에 준세되네 샤스 이두잔다 드린 잠든데 샤기 아니 좋아요나 고주로 지스.
So J. Rinpoche is giving this extensive explanation about arguments based on what the other party accepts. And it now going through these various debates or objections and showing how there's no flaws in his positions, going one by one to answer these objections. And the reason that it's so important to give such an extensive explanation about the arguments based on what other party accepts is because we're saying that in order to give rise to the view of realizing emptiness, then we must use reason. We must use a reason or an argument. And so we only can use the arguments based on what the other party accepts. That's the kind of reason that's acceptable or usable. So then there's many different kinds of debates or objections that people can bring up. So there is first objections based on just the kind of meaning of what is the really what is an argument based on what the other party accepts. Those objections were answered. Then this one was an objection just based on this phrase itself, the phrase what the other party accepts. So now that was answered. So there's these different kinds of objections being raised. And so this one was again focused on this kind of the notion that, well, when we say an argument based on what the other party accepts, what it's doing is that it is showing the other party a contradiction, and based on through showing them a contradiction, leading them to refute their position, right? Leading them to override or refute their position. So this is all meant to show these different the features of an argument based on what the other party accepts. So it's basic sort of nature, or sort of just what it is, how it's defined, how you should understand it, what its function is, what its purpose is. So all these things are being sort of clarified as we go through these different objections. And so that's why Tsongkhapa is J. Rinpoche is giving this time and making this full explanation and analysis here. So now we'll leave the explanation of the text for today, stop for today, and then we can do question and answers if people have any questions.
No, soon.
Mila Date, Mila Date, Mila Date Dang, Gabe Chu Tingi Yuna, Yunyam Damena Menyam, Dufona Tingi, Nurture than Nurture color room for Ditsitic, engage decision.
So the question is just asking, so back above here on page yeah.
추진 미기딩도 때문에 따뜻하다 가지 추디 유나 유념다 메나 미념제 람나 세지 오다 디다기 도와티 추수와
What page is it in English? Can you find it?
엄마라 인지 기 페이지 가서도 디 지선다 걸로
Inji based on Ranima.
알레 最不得
where was
刚的，
we started on page 269, right? Okay, so it was down there. Okay, how is this done? The reason, okay. Okay. Hmm.
이 강들 뒤츠니 말고비 신자게 조어디 츠나 최진 미들랑라 미다와 따디 단위도 열라 무소라 따와 랑고 두바데 단위도 매베 nga마디 치명 고제도 룬키 근데 쯔버지도 와 뒤쯔버디 강코랑도 와 근데 쯔버
Okay, so it's page 270 at the top here, and it just says, therefore, the former can be used to refute the latter, the middle of the first paragraph. In the case of the I, the reason, in the case of the I, one, the reason not seeing itself, and two, the predicate of the refutation, not seeing other things, are either the same in that both exist or the same in that both do not exist. So how could either contradict the existence of the other? So he's asking just to explain that again.
오야 다든데 인더 디스고를 가서 신자기 딘들 딘지디기 신기 담자 고바 지기래 담자 신기 담자라 가와 뜀비고니 아니 두바 지역이 가와 뜀단디 따디 베나 진다 베나 좋아지 마고 와이나 미쳐진 신라랑 신기 미다디 랑라 미다위 치르스도 따 미테 랑라 따와디와 랑라 따와디 균젠데 따스디 균젠데와 랑라 랑라 미다와디 균젠도 전에 신라랑 신기 따와디 까고와 이제 같이 쳐디 신라랑 신기 따와디래 다랑 신기 미다데스도 미다와 두고래 두네 까야디랑 신기 따와디 까고래 인도잖아요 다 랑라 미다와 따디당 같이 쳐 신라랑 신기 따와디 아니 유나 유념다 매념 라와이나 유나 베나 유나 수도 가리래 아 랑라 미다와디 유나 신라랑 신기 따와디 요거래스 신라랑 신기 따와디 메나 랑라 미다와디 메고래스 유나 유념 매념 쓰는 디리 그와 같이 쳐 신라랑 신기 따와디로 와데 랑루기 디 메바 두고라 같이 쳐스디 두비 치고 로조디로 와 두비 두베디 랑신기 미데 디니 따디기 신라랑 신기 미다와 두고라 와 된자 같이 쳐 신라랑 신기 따와디래 단 신라랑 신기 따와디당 아 랑라 미다와디 아니 심 미기딩도 최신 미기딩도 유나 유념레스 최진 미기딩도 아니 랑라 미다와디 유나 신라랑 신기 따와디 요거래 신라랑 신기 따와디 메나 랑라 미다와디 메와 주부레 신라와이나 아니 랑라 미다위 따라테네 신라랑 신기 따와디 까 두고 말레스 그와 뉘제당 뉘자 칼라룽스디 랑라 미다위 따라테네 아니 신라랑 신기 따와디 까에게 뉘제스나 고 까에디로와 뉘제신데 고 뉘제 주에게 균젠디로와 인도서 뉘제 주에 균젠디 랑라 미다와디 뉘제 주에 균젠인사 뉘제체 다티 균젠나 때네 가린 뉘자 랑신기 따와디 까고에서 랑신 따와라 뉘자 차와리 인도서는 랑라 미다와 유 랑신라 랑신기 따와디 매장 아니 랑라 미다위 따라 때네 신라 랑시 따와디 까 두고레스 다티 많이 바체 아니 랑라 미다와당 신라 랑신기 따와디 유나 유념베스디 랑라 미다와디 유나 신라 랑신기 따와디 요거레스 신라 랑신기 따와디 맨나 랑라 미다와디 메고르나 아니 코니 균제 랑라 미다위 균제나 때네 신라 랑신기 따와디 까 두고 말레스 된다디 쓴거다 까 두고 말레스 인도전에 신라 랑신기 따와디 타니도 시마 주바 인상 티 마주바디 주바 제발라 아니 랑라 미다위 균제나 때네 두고레스 인자 랑라 미다와디 신라 랑신기 따와디 고바치비 균제레 소다디 어디슨 숨도 숨에 디레다 늦늦이 된다 각자다 고자다 고제세 늦늦이 쓰디나 세마다 저도 주부면 들으면 받지 디가 무슨 늦늦이 쓰디 고제당 아니 고자 고제디 가리 랑신 랑라 미다와디로 랑라 미다위 균제나 때네 신라 랑신 따와디 까고라 인자 각자디 신라 랑신 따와디로 와 그래서 실라 랑신 따와디 랑신 따와디 매장 아니 팀매바 두베게 되는 체마지 군생지 요래 요에디 가는 랑을 미다와디 그래서 랑을 미다와디 아니 요장 실라 랑신 따와디 가 두고 계시 랑을 미다와디 매나 실라 랑신 따와디 가 두고 말해 그래서 어다 둔다 다 가지 최당 따니 직요 직매 다 둔다도 가리래 따 가리래 랑을 미다와디 요 가지 최 랑신 따와디 매 인상 유명냠바 말했을 때니 다 지름지 송에디 코니 유명냠바 말했어 직유 직매 따디 유 가지셔도 매 매상 매바디 시두부장 뒤두지기 세마지 요래 티가스나 라마미다와디레스 오두 스니다 아 근세고도 나가말 소네들아
So the line here, that is saying in the sentence, in the case of the I, number one, the reason not seeing itself, and number two, the predicate of the refutation, not seeing other things, are either the same in that both exist or the same in that both do not exist. It's not actually saying that. Like Tsongkhapa is not positing that. He's saying that this is what the other party believes. Okay, so it's really challenging from this phrasing or this translation to get the point. But he's saying that the other party, right? So again, what is the whole purpose here? Argument based on what the other party accepts is to take the other party's position, right? Their thesis, their belief, their position, and to refute it. Refute it how? By showing an internal contradiction in their assertions, in their positions. Okay, so now we have the reason, a sign, we call it the sign, we can call it the reason which is not seeing themselves. Okay, the eyes don't see themselves. That's the reason, not seeing themselves. Then we have the predicate being refuted. Okay, the predicate being refuted is seeing other things naturally or intrinsically. That's the predicate being refuted. So again, that's confusing from the English wording because it says two, the predicate of the refutation, not seeing other things. Well, that's just the predicate of this argument, right? But we're looking at now the refuted predicate. That's the opposite of the predicate, which is seeing other things intrinsically. Okay, so for the opponent here, this is essentialist opponent, they're saying they would say that these two, the reason, not seeing oneself, and the refuted predicate, seeing other things naturally, intrinsically, those are equal such that, this is like to kind of match the Tibetan phrasing better here, it just says in English, they're the same in that both exist or the same in that both don't exist. Really what it means is that they're on the same footing. They're equal such that if one is there, if one exists, the other must exist. If one doesn't exist, the other must not exist. So they're looking at them that way. So which is to say, if not seeing itself exists, on the basis of eyes, right? So we're looking at within, the subject is still the eyes, okay? If not seeing themselves exists, then intrinsically seeing other things exists. If not seeing themselves does not exist, then intrinsically seeing other things does not exist, right? They're equating those. So if that were the case, then how could there be any way to show a contradiction and to use this reason to harm or disprove the refuted predicate? Right? How could you use the reason of not seeing itself to prove that the eyes do not, right, intrinsically see other things? How could you harm the view, the position that they see other things intrinsically? So what is the harmer and what is the harmed? What is the proof to disprove, and what is the disproven? Well, the proof to disprove is not seeing itself. The thing disproven is seeing other things intrinsically. The harmer, you could say, right? The harmer, it's a weird word, but anyway, the harmer, the thing doing the harm is not seeing itself. The thing being harmed is seeing other things not intrinsically. Okay, so this is how J. Rinpoche is showing that you can use this reason to refute or disprove the wrong position, which is the refuted predicate here, because in reality, the eyes do not intrinsically see, right? In reality, they are contradictory. Not seeing itself and seeing other things intrinsically are contradictory in reality. So that's why you can use them. So this is the position that the other party has, or we could say, if it were the case that, you know, if one exists, the other must exist, and if one doesn't exist, the other must not exist. If that were true, then you couldn't use this reason to disprove that the eyes see other things intrinsically, but because they are not the case, that is not the case. One of them exists and one of them doesn't exist, right? Not seeing itself exists, seeing other things intrinsically doesn't exist. Okay, so that's what that sentence is saying. So again, it's pointing out the purpose and the function of this argument based on what other party accepts.
Thank you.
Yeah, the 12 minutes I'm shaking.
Okay, so if there are no more questions, we will stop the class.
Sa xi bu xi ju xi men do zhama ri ra wa ling xi nian de jian ba san jie xin do men de bu ba yin zhou gu nam da xin jue ba ra xiu yi da mong gu ru ra na men da wa nian yan da ya mi gang re ra we gu we xin gu ma su pen dang de wa ma lu chung jie re si wang dian zin jia zu yin xia bi si de ba dian gu ru ji ga dian du ji kam su chi le ju do ju da bu long do jie lo se nam la ri la mang zhe mian de lam dun jie wei xin so wa de chang ju sim ju rim bu jie ma jie ba nam jie ju ru jie wa nyam ba me ba yang kong ne kong pe wa shu ta zin ne gun se wei mian jie bu sa mo dian zhe ta dang cha wei pa zhu lu zhu yab ze gong ba da qi xi kong du ju gyu ru ngo jie wa di jie wu gun su na ma yi xi zuo zuo su na ma yi xi le zhong mi tang ba gu ni to ba ra shu. Thank you to Chi. Good night, all of you.
Thank you.